Well, there is a common enemy unifying US lawmakers on Capitol Hill who normally disagree. That enemy is a proposed big government bailout for Spirit Airlines worth $500 million. Pete Muntean here to talk about that. Pete, here's an example of the unity that I was just alluding to there. Senators Ted Cruz and Elizabeth Warren, no less, a right-wing Trump loyalist and a very progressive Democrat, both up in arms, calling this a terrible idea and asking, what do the American people get out of this? So is there an explanation for the Trump administration's reasoning in bailing out Spirit at this point?
It really begs the question about whether or not this is indeed a good idea. $500 million, $500 million, with more developments on this story all the time. You know, President Trump opened the door to a possible bailout on Tuesday. Wednesday, a source told us that the Trump administration was in advanced talks, and now we're told a deal could come as soon as today here in the United States. The newest wrinkle here is that this is facing some pretty big pushback in Trump's own party, with some calling this idea the nationalization of Spirit Airlines and that it verges on socialism. Here's what we're talking about. A source close to these talks tells us the federal government's considering a $500 million bailout of Spirit Airlines. It would include the federal government taking a stake in the airline. You have to remember, Spirit Airlines is an ultra low-cost carrier where everything is extra, similar to Ryanair in Europe. It struggled to make some money, though, since the COVID pandemic. JetBlue tried to acquire Spirit in July 2022. That deal fell apart when the Biden administration said it would spoil competition. Then in November 2024, Spirit filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and last March, Spirit emerged from bankruptcy, but just said a few months later that it would struggle to stay afloat for another year, which brings us to now. The rise in fuel costs due to the war with Iran really has Spirit on the ropes.
Well, I understand the airline is bankrupt because the previous administration blocked the merger, which was probably not a wise move. Obviously, this is something the Commerce Department and the president are tracking. I don't have any updates or announcements, but the aviation industry is very important to this president and this White House. Millions of Americans depend on it. We want to see the best possible outcome.
So clearly, this could be a huge economic event, any way you slice it. If the federal government bails out Spirit Airlines, that would be big, potentially saving about 14,000 jobs. It's also a huge deal for passengers. If they have travel booked on Spirit Airlines, we're about to go into the huge summer travel season. Also begs mentioning that a lot of people have credits on Spirit Airlines, so there's some big questions about what would happen to that. Still a lot to play out here, Becky. We're only sort of in the genesis of this idea, and Trump really favors himself as a bit of a deal maker. So we'll see if this is really an attempt to save face as this war with Iran is really having huge ripple effects, not only here, but also everywhere else.
Joining me now, Nick Ewen. He's editor-in-chief for The Points Guy. You guys keep an eye on the industry. And I think we're trying to figure out, is this a case of Spirit problems versus war in Iran, fuel, and overall airline vulnerability? Here's what President Trump said when he called into CNBC about Spirit.
Spirit's in trouble, and I'd love somebody to buy Spirit. It's 14,000 jobs. And maybe the federal government should help that one out. You know, I tell my people.
And then the response from senators on both sides of the aisle is frustration. I think, honestly, they're just triggered by the word bailout, which fair. You had Ted Cruz saying this is an absolutely terrible idea. You had Elizabeth Warren saying, yeah, what would the American people get out of this? So first, how realistic do you think this is?
Well, I think Spirit is in really tough financial position right now. So I do think that it is very possible that the government could pursue this because there are a number of jobs, and Spirit, as a low-cost airline, does exert competitive pressure on other airlines to keep their fares low. But right now, their financial position is so dire that without any support or an outside investor coming in, it could really be challenging for them to stay afloat and continue running their operations.
The Wall Street Journal was reporting that Trump actually met with the Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, and also the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick. And then later they were saying, look, we don't want to put good money after bad. He says there's been a lot of money thrown at Spirit. They haven't found their way into profitability. And so would we just forestall the inevitable and then own that? That's a good question. Can you talk about how the industry thinks about that?
Yeah, of course. The bottom line is that Spirit has to find a pathway towards longer term success. Now, that could be that the government takes a temporary stake and then ultimately there is some consolidation in the industry. Of course, the piece earlier referenced the proposed merger between JetBlue and Spirit that was blocked and ultimately halted by a judge. But at the end of the day, Spirit has to figure out what the future looks like in order to be successful. And that's likely what the government would be looking at. This is not just about injecting cash. This is about a long-term plan towards financial viability, and that's going to be the key thing that would move any of these conversations forward.
Is this war destabilizing companies in the industry that are already vulnerable?
Well, that's exactly what's happened with Spirit. Spirit was already in a really tough financial spot. Number of factors contributing to that, including increased leasing costs, some engine issues they had, and just their overall operating model. They've been struggling a lot coming out of the COVID pandemic. We have seen other airlines have similar issues, but they haven't gotten to the point of being on the brink of liquidation. They are larger. They have joint venture partners, other airline partners that can offer essentially a lifeline by funneling passengers and offering a broader route network. So right now, Spirit is relatively unique, but this could, depending on how long this continues, really have a drag on airline financial success. And down the road, we could start to see others get into a more precarious situation.
In the meantime, it seems like they're raising prices. Maybe I'm misreading it from my trauma from my spring break and being in the airport during the TSA meltdown. But prices are up 20%. That's not 2% or 4%. That's a lot, especially for those coach travelers. Can you talk about realistically during this war, what our travel budgets are going to look like?
Yeah, that's an unfortunate reality. Jet fuel tends to be the second largest expense for an airline aside from labor. So if you see these hugely increased prices, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in added expenses, and that can really eat into an airline's profit. They're going to do everything they can to not pass along those costs to customers because they know that demand is highly dependent on pricing, but at some point they have to, and that's what we're already starting to see. So there's a combination of increased prices as well as some small but still significant cutbacks to some routes